As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster.
One line, 9 words, and you already know exactly where you are. Goodfellas came out in September 1990 and hit audiences like a freight train. Not because it was glamorous, though it absolutely was, but because it felt disturbingly real. The clothes, the food, the casual violence, the way these guys talked over each other like they were at a Sunday dinner that happened to involve a murder in the trunk. Martin Scorsese wasn't making a crime movie. He was reconstructing a world. The film is based on Nicholas Pileggi's 1986 book Wise Guy, built from hours of recorded conversations with Henry Hill, a real mob associate who flipped on the Lucchese crime family and entered witness protection. So when you watch Henry narrate his own downfall with that strange mix of pride and regret, you're not watching fiction. You're watching a man remember his life. But here's what most people don't know. The gap between what's on screen and what actually happened is wider and weirder than you'd expect. The casting nearly fell apart. The most iconic shot in the film almost wrecked the entire schedule. The real people behind the characters showed up on set, threatened lawsuits, and in one case, watched themselves get portrayed while hiding from the government. Today we're counting down 15 weird facts about Goodfellas that most people don't know. And by the time we get to number 1, the movie you thought you knew will look a little different. If you grew up watching this on late-night cable, quoting it in the hallway, wondering how much of it was real, hit like, subscribe, and let's get into it. The book had a different name, and studios didn't want to touch it. Before Goodfellas was a movie, it was a book. Nicholas Pileggi's Wise Guy came out in 1986 and landed with serious weight. It wasn't a sensationalized mob thriller. It was a carefully reported, almost journalistic account of Henry Hill's life inside the Lucchese family. Pileggi had spent years working the organized crime beat for New York Magazine, and he knew how to separate mythology from mechanics. Hollywood wasn't exactly lining up. The book was dense. It jumped around in time. It had no traditional arc where the hero grows, learns, and becomes a better person. Henry Hill didn't become better. He became a government witness to save himself. That's a survival story, and studios in the late 1980s weren't sure audiences wanted that. Scorsese read it and knew immediately. He called Pileggi before he'd even finished it, which Pileggi later said was the best phone call of his life. The two co-wrote the screenplay together. Scorsese pushed hard to keep the non-linear structure, the competing narrations, the moral ambiguity. Nobody gets punished by the universe in this film. Henry goes into witness protection. Jimmy probably gets away with everything. That's not Hollywood. That's New York. The title changed to Goodfellas because Universal already held the rights to the name Wise Guy for a television series. Small footnote. Massive ripple. Without that naming conflict, the film might have been buried under association with a network show. Martin Scorsese's mother played Tommy's mother. In one of the most quietly remarkable pieces of casting in the whole film, the woman who feeds Tommy DeVito and Jimmy Conway homemade pasta at 3 a.m., after what you can only assume has been a very bad night, is not a professional actress. Well, she is. But she's also Martin Scorsese's actual mother. Catherine Scorsese played Mama DeVito in that late-night dinner scene. Tommy and Jimmy show up in the middle of the night, covered in what you'd rather not know, and she gets up, starts cooking, and tells them a story about a painting she just finished. The warmth in the scene isn't manufactured. Catherine Scorsese cooked real food on set. The pasta, the wine, the whole spread. She prepared it herself. This wasn't the first time Scorsese cast his mother. She had small roles in Mean Streets, Raging Bull, and other films throughout his career. But Goodfellas is her most remembered appearance, partly because the scene is so perfectly placed in the film. You just watch these men dealing with a body, and then immediately you see them being doted on by a sweet old woman who has no idea who she's feeding. Joe Pesci and Robert De Niro both talked about how easy the scene was to film because Catherine Scorsese made it feel like an actual kitchen. The discomfort of the whole sequence works precisely because the comfort is so real. The Spider murder was based on a real killing, and it was worse. In the film, Tommy DeVito shoots a young errand runner named Spider twice across 2 separate scenes. First in the foot during a card game, then fatally when Spider talks back to him. It plays as a kind of horrible joke. Tommy kills a kid over a comment. Jimmy Conway laughs about it immediately after. The real Spider was a young associate named Michael Gianco. The broad strokes of what happened are true. He was shot in the foot during a game. He was later killed for responding to the humiliation. The detail that makes it darker: the men involved barely paused. It was treated as an inconvenience, not a murder. Scorsese kept this in the film because it shows something no amount of narration could explain. Violence in this world isn't dramatic or operatic. It's reflexive. Tommy doesn't build to killing Spider. He just does it the way you'd swat something away. And the scene works because the other men in the room react with irritation and amusement, not horror. Michael Imperioli, who played Spider, later went on to play Christopher Moltisanti in The Sopranos, another character who gets shot and survives, which became a running joke between him and the writers on that show. Life imitating art, imitating a very uncomfortable. Robert De Niro worked at an actual restaurant to prepare. Robert De Niro, playing Jimmy Conway, based on real-life mob associate Jimmy Burke, is one of the most controlled performances in the film. He doesn't raise his voice. He smiles at the wrong moments. He goes cold in a way that's more frightening than any outburst. Getting there took work. De Niro's preparation process is well documented by now. He gained weight for Raging Bull, drove a cab for Taxi Driver. For Goodfellas, he met with actual organized crime figures and spent time working at a restaurant. Physically working, taking tables, because Jimmy Burke was deeply embedded in restaurant culture. These men ate together, transacted business over food, built loyalties at specific tables. De Niro also studied Burke specifically, working closely with Henry Hill's accounts of him. Burke was known for his generosity, tipping lavishly, buying rounds, making people feel taken care of, and then being capable of extreme violence without any visible warning. De Niro built the performance entirely around that contradiction. The scene where Jimmy sits watching the other men from across the bar after the Lufthansa heist, deciding one by one which of them has to go, is De Niro doing the most with the least. No lines, just a man thinking at a table. It might be the most frightening 30 seconds in the entire film. The real Lufthansa heist money was never found. In December 1978, a crew associated with Jimmy Burke robbed the Lufthansa cargo terminal at JFK Airport and walked out with approximately $5 million in cash and $875,000 in jewelry. It remains one of the largest cash robberies in American history. The film covers the aftermath more than the heist itself. Henry Hill narrates how Jimmy started eliminating everyone involved, not out of paranoia, but out of simple math. Fewer people alive means a larger share per person. Burke allegedly ordered the deaths of most of the participants over the following months. Here's what the film doesn't linger on. Almost none of the money was ever recovered. The FBI spent years chasing it. Some investigators believed Burke buried portions of it. Others suspected it was laundered through businesses so quickly it became untraceable. When Burke died in prison in 1996, he took whatever he knew with him. The total number of people killed in connection with the heist and its aftermath is estimated between 6 and 8. Some of those deaths appear in the film. Others happen too far off the margins to make the cut. What's strange is how Scorsese treats the heist itself, which sounds like the climax of any other crime film, as almost a footnote. The money doesn't save anybody. It just speeds up the timeline of who's going to betray whom. Joe Pesci pulled a funny how, seen from a real experience. There are film scenes people quote for decades. The funny how scene in Goodfellas is one of them. Tommy DeVito corners Henry Hill mid-dinner with increasingly threatening variations of funny like a clown. I amuse you, until the whole table goes silent, and then it was a joke. Tommy was just messing with him. Well, most people don't know. Joe Pesci didn't invent this from thin air. He pulled it from something that actually happened to him before he was famous. When Pesci was working in and around clubs connected to organized crime in New Jersey, he once told a made man that he was funny, as a compliment. The man's reaction scared him. The guy went quiet. The table went quiet. Pesci understood in that moment that you don't tell these people what they are. You just watch. He brought the story to Scorsese, who gave Pesci and Liotta the basic parameters of the scene and told them to build it. The dialogue was worked out in rehearsal and refined on the day. Many of the other actors at that table were real mob-adjacent figures from the New York area that Scorsese had cast as extras. They didn't know exactly what was coming, which is partly why their reactions looked so genuine. Pesci won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for this role. His acceptance speech ran about 5 seconds. "It is my privilege. Thank you." He sat down. Somehow that felt completely right. Tommy DeSimone's family threatened legal action before filming started. The real Tommy was Thomas DeSimone, and by most accounts he was more violent and more erratic than the film even suggests. He disappeared in January 1979, widely believed to have been killed by the Gambino family in retaliation for the murder of Billy Batts, a made Gambino member, which is the pivotal scene early in the film. That matters because killing a made man without permission from the bosses is one of the few acts in mob culture that essentially guarantees a death sentence. Before Goodfellas went into production, members of the DeSimone family, including his sister Rosemary, made clear through legal channels that they objected to how Thomas was being portrayed. Painting a family member as an unstable murderer, even one who is already dead, raised defamation concerns. The production had to navigate that carefully. The Tommy DeVito name served as a thin layer of legal separation, and certain specific details about DeSimone's crimes were deliberately vague or altered to reduce exposure. The irony is that Joe Pesci's Tommy DeVito became one of the most iconic performances in American cinema. The real man's family tried to stop the film. It didn't work. And now Thomas DeSimone is remembered almost entirely through a performance he never would have approved. The real Karen Hill hated her portrayal. Then she changed her mind. Karen Friedman Hill is one of the most complicated figures in the whole Goodfellas story. The film portrays her as a woman who gets pulled into the mob life, finds it exciting at first, grows frightened, and then complicit, and ultimately survives by helping Henry flip on everyone they knew. Lorraine Bracco played her and was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress. The performance is fierce. Karen isn't passive in this film. She waves a gun at Henry. She helps him move drugs. She watches people and situations with a calculating eye. Karen Hill didn't love this. In interviews after the film's release, she pushed back hard. She felt the film overstated her involvement in the drug operation. She felt certain scenes painted her in a harsher light than reality warranted. She also objected to how the film handled her emotional response to Henry's affairs. She felt the complexity of what she lived through got flattened into a series of reactions. Over time, though, her position shifted. By the mid-2000s, she was more positive about the film. She eventually co-wrote her own memoir, which gave her a chance to fill in what Scorsese left out or reframed. The real story of Karen and Henry is genuinely hard to categorize. They had children together. They were in love at points. They were also entangled in something that eventually destroyed everything they'd built. The film gets the shape of that right without always getting the texture. Henry Hill was on set while still in witness protection. This one stops people cold when they hear it. Henry Hill testified against members of the Lucchese crime family in 1980 and entered the federal witness protection program. He was given a new identity, relocated, and was supposed to disappear. The people he testified against had made clear, through the kinds of signals that don't need to be spoken out loud, that he was a target. By the time Scorsese was shooting Goodfellas in 1989, Henry Hill was consulting on the film. He was on set in New York. He was talking to Ray Liotta about who Henry Hill was, how he walked, how he talked, what he ordered, how he handled rooms full of people he needed to manage. He was advising Scorsese on period details and on what needed to be changed for legal reasons. He was doing all of this while still technically in witness protection, which the U.S. Marshal Service would probably describe as a significant violation of the entire point of witness protection. Being on a major Hollywood film set in New York connected to one of the most publicized mob prosecutions of the decade is not what lying low looks like. Hill was eventually removed from the program, partly because of incidents like this, partly because he kept attracting attention. He spent the rest of his life in a strange, kind of public existence, giving interviews, running into trouble, consulting on projects. He died in Los Angeles in June 2012 at 69. The detail that stays with you. Ray Liotta spent weeks learning how to play Henry Hill from Henry Hill himself. The man showed an actor how to be him while hiding from people who wanted him dead. Scorsese cast real, mob-adjacent figures as extras throughout the film. When you watch Goodfellas, certain scenes feel almost like documentary footage. The restaurant scenes, the card games, the way men talk in back rooms. There's a specificity to the energy that's very hard to fake with trained actors alone. Part of the reason is Scorsese's approach to background casting. He specifically sought out people from the neighborhoods and social circles the film was depicting. Some of the extras and minor characters in Goodfellas had real connections to the world being portrayed. Not necessarily active criminals, but people who grew up in that environment, who understood the codes, who moved and spoke in ways that no rehearsal room could teach. This created genuine tension on set at points. Ray Liotta has mentioned that certain scenes felt uncomfortable because the people around him weren't performing the way trained actors perform. The reactions were less predictable. The silences were real silences. It also meant that details in the film, which look like stylistic choices, are often just accurate. The specific way someone greets another person. The order men enter a room. The way nobody makes direct eye contact during certain conversations. These weren't blocking decisions. They were just how it's done. Ray Liotta almost didn't get the role. This is the fact that makes you stop and actually think about what Goodfellas would have been without Ray Liotta. The role of Henry Hill was one of the most sought-after parts of 1989. The Wise Guy book had been a bestseller. Everyone knew Scorsese was adapting it. The role required someone who could carry the entire film across 3 decades, narrate his own moral collapse, and make an audience root for a man making genuinely terrible choices the whole time. Names that circulated included Tom Cruise and John Travolta. Both represented the marquee star power studios typically push for on major productions. But Scorsese's instinct was that a famous face would create too much distance. Henry Hill wasn't a movie star. He was a neighborhood guy who happened to end up inside one of the most documented mob prosecutions in American history. Ray Liotta had something wild on his resume and a solid television presence, but he wasn't a guaranteed box office name. He pursued the role aggressively, meeting with Scorsese multiple times, doing his own research into Hill's story. Scorsese went with him because of what he brought to those meetings, a quality that's hard to name but instantly recognizable. Henry Hill in the film is charming and dangerous and self-deceiving simultaneously. He believes his own mythology even as it's collapsing around him. Playing all 3 of those things at once, without telegraphing which one is winning, is what Liotta did. If Cruise or Travolta had taken a role, it would have been a different film. Nobody really wants to think about what that version looks like. The As Far Back as I Can Remember opening almost didn't make it. Martin Scorsese has described the opening of Goodfellas, the trunk, the violence, and then Liotta's voiceover as one of the most important structural decisions in the entire film. As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster. That line is now cemented in American film history. But early cuts of the film had a more conventional opening. The voiceover narration from both Henry and Karen was one of the last major structural decisions Scorsese finalized in the edit. The choice to open with the trunk, the violence, and then immediately cut to young Henry watching mobsters from his window was a deliberate collapse of the film's timeline. You see where it ends before you see where it begins. The studio had reservations. The nonlinear structure, the dual narration, the nearly 2.5-hour runtime all gave universal pause. Scorsese held the line on all of it. The film was released as he cut it. In that opening, the sudden violence followed by a kid at a window and the most self-aware line in mob movie history became the template crime films have been chasing ever since. The Copacabana shot took 3 days and almost killed the schedule. If you've seen Goodfellas, you remember the Copacabana scene. Henry takes Karen on a date. Instead of going through the front door, they go through the back, through the kitchen, through hallways, past prep cooks and dishwashers and waitstaff, and emerge into the club where a table materializes for them front and center, right by the stage. The camera follows all of it in one unbroken take. It runs approximately 3 minutes. It covers hundreds of feet of physical space. It required exact coordination between the camera operator, the dolly crew, every single person visible in the frame, and 2 lead actors who had to hit their marks while behaving like they weren't thinking about hitting their marks at all. The shot was designed to do something specific. Scorsese wanted the audience to feel what Karen felt, swept up, impressed, slightly off balance. A conventional edit gives viewers time to think. The unbroken take removes that option. You move through this world at the pace Henry sets, and by the time you emerge into that club, you understand exactly why someone would fall for this life. Scorsese and cinematographer Michael Ballhaus planned the shot meticulously, on paper, in rehearsal, in walk-throughs without cameras. Then they shot it. 3 days, multiple takes, constant adjustments. The maitre d', who appears with the table, has a roughly 10-second window to place it before the camera arrives. Early or late, the take is dead. Ray Liotta has described shooting it as one of the most technically demanding things he's ever done. Not because it required emotional intensity, but because it required him to be completely natural under conditions that were completely unnatural. 3 days of work to buy 3 minutes of effortlessness. Henry Hill gave the film his blessing, then spent years undermining it. Henry Hill's relationship with Goodfellas is one of the stranger footnotes in the film's history. He cooperated with Nicholas Pileggi on the book. He consulted on the film. He gave interviews about it for the rest of his life. He also spent a significant portion of his post-witness protection years publicly contradicting details, correcting scenes, and occasionally insisting the film made him look worse or better, depending on which interview you were reading. Hill's legal and personal troubles after leaving witness protection are well documented. He was arrested multiple times. He struggled with addiction for years. He worked odd jobs, gave mob-themed cooking lessons, sold pasta sauce under his own name. He was a walking contradiction. The man whose testimony helped dismantle part of organized crime in New York, who then spent his freedom getting into exactly the kind of low-level trouble that the people he testified against would have found embarrassing. What's strange is how central the film became to his identity. He'd spent his whole life being Henry Hill, mob associate. Then a decade as Henry Hill, government witness. Then for his last 20 years, he was Henry Hill, the guy from Goodfellas. He gave tours. He appeared on reality television. He called into radio programs. He was simultaneously profiting from a story that depicted him committing crimes and distancing himself from the parts he didn't like. The film is probably the most honest version of his life that exists, and he spent the rest of his life negotiating with it. The ending was Scorsese's deliberate rejection of every mob movie before it. When Goodfellas ends, Henry Hill is in a bathrobe outside a suburban house, picking up the morning paper, narrating his own boredom. He turned his whole world into testimony. Everyone he knew is either dead or in prison, and now he has to live like a schnook. That last word, schnook, it lands differently when you understand what Scorsese was doing with it. Every mob film before Goodfellas had a version of the same ending. The rise, the fall, the lesson. Even The Godfather, for all its complexity, structures its tragedy around Michael Corleone's transformation. There's an arc. There's something lost. The audience understand what happened. Goodfellas refuses this. Henry Hill doesn't understand what was lost. He's annoyed that witness protection means buying his own pasta. The film doesn't punish him with insight. It just shows you the aftermath of a life and lets you feel whatever you're going to feel about it. Scorsese has talked about this ending at length. He wanted audiences to feel the hollowness of a life even as Henry can't feel it himself. The voiceover tells you Henry misses the old days. The image shows a man in a bathrobe. The gap between those two things is the entire moral argument of the film. And then Tommy shoots the camera. The fourth wall break at the very end, Tommy turning and firing directly at the audience, has been analyzed since 1990. Scorsese lifted it from a 1903 Edison short called The Great Train Robbery, where a gunman faces the camera and fires at the end of the reel. It was the first major use of direct audience address in film history. Using it here means something specific. You watched this. You were entertained. You laughed at the right moments. You got caught up in the clothes and the music and the movement of this world. You let yourself be seduced by it, which is exactly what Henry Hill did. Now take that. Not a lesson, a charge. And that's 15 facts about Goodfellas that most people don't know, and that change how you see the film once you do. The more you dig into what actually happened versus what made it a screen, the more you realize Scorsese was doing something harder than it looks. He took a real story with real people who were still alive and made a film that was honest about the appeal of this life without ever endorsing it. That's a narrower path than it seems. Henry Hill died in June 2012 at 69. Jimmy Burke, Jimmy Conway in the film, died in federal prison in 1996. Paul Vario, the real Paul Cicero, died in federal prison in 1988, 2 years before the film even came out. The movie outlasted most of the people it's about. If this sent you straight back to the couch with a need to rewatch it, good. Drop in the comments which fact hit you the hardest. And if you know a Goodfellas detail we missed, put it down there. We read everything. Hit subscribe for more deep dives like this. Until next time, this is